So Ravens flock, we still got a ways to go before we get to the point of this year where the final 53-man roster is announced. But we still can take this opportunity to anticipate, predict, and anticipate who's gonna make the final roster. Some names will be easy to guess, like when it comes to starters or like early draft picks. But then beyond that point, it could become a little tricky because we drafted so many players, but there's only really so many available spots open for these players. And on top of drafting a lot of players, we brought in a lot of UDFAs, undrafted free agents. And the Ravens are a team that takes undrafted free agents just as seriously as they take draft prospects, or just as seriously as they take players who got drafted. Every year, the Ravens pretty much are guaranteed to get at least one UDFA on the roster. At one point, we were on a streak where we had like so many years in a row where we brought at least one UDFA onto the roster. I don't know if that streak is still active, but clearly it is a streak that the Ravens care about. It's a strategy that the Ravens care about, and I actually do understand it, because even though we haven't necessarily found star players or superstars from UDFA, we have still found very solid starters and fan favorites over the years. Guys like Michael Pierce, who was a fan favorite on the defensive line, a guy who just retired. He was a undrafted guy. Guys like Gus Edwards, who when he was here, he was a fan favorite at the running back position. He was an undrafted guy. So the Ravens have had some level of success with undrafted players over the years. And like every year, there's a lot of players that they bring in, and then we have several weeks to figure out which one of these guys do we think has the best chance of making it. And one guy who many Ravens fans have been excited about over the past several days since it was announced who was signed as an undrafted free agent was Kaimon Rucker. Now, Kaimon is a linebacker out of the University of North Carolina. He weighs about, I think, 245 to 250, somewhere around there. He's 6'2", not the longest arms, but either way, he's a really solid and productive player out of UNC. He doesn't have a whole lot of measurables that you can go off of at the combine, because he's dealt with injuries essentially all year, and the only combine activity he had participated in was the bench press, where he benched 27 reps. But he's a guy who is a fifth-year player, and again, this draft class is the last group of young people who were freshmen during that whole COVID era. So during that, when all of that crazy stuff was happening. But in his time at UNC, he had a what I consider a successful run or a successful career at the college level, where he had 22 sacks, which is the sixth highest in his school's history. And while 22 sacks in 5 years isn't necessarily a crazy amount of sacks, at the end of the day, regardless of the school, if you finish top 10 in almost any stat, that's still something to be proud of. I know I would be proud of it, so I'm sure he probably is proud of it as well. He also had 4 forced fumbles and an impressive interception. 2023 was a breakout year for him. Essentially, he had about 8 or 8.5 sacks, also 60 pressures. He was a guy who many people thought was going to have an even bigger 2024, but unfortunately, injuries held him back in 2024. He still was productive for the most part when he was out on the field. He had 6 sacks in 8 games in 2024, but he missed a lot of time because he was dealing with the fibula fracture, and that's really the main thing that's going to concern me, is just like the injury issue. Now you got to wonder, is this going to be another guy that we bring in who just becomes injury prone and we can't really do nothing with him, and it doesn't really become anything? Now, he's a guy who's only projected to go in the 6th or 7th round, so he's not somebody where you would expect to set the world on fire as a UDFA, but he's still somebody who could possibly fight to get on the roster. But at the same time, my main concern would be, is this the best he can possibly be, or is there more that he can achieve with a coach like Chuck Smith? I don't know. That's my main concern when you got guys who were in college for 5 years, is at this point, you got to start to wonder, have they already maxed out their potential? And again, it's no disrespect to him because he's still young, and anything is possible. So we'll see how that goes. But one thing that I did like that has nothing to do with his game or nothing to do with the parts of his game that we can measure like stats or whatever, but is the fact that his nickname is the Butcher. That is a very cool nickname for an edge rusher. But will he live up to that sort of nickname at the NFL level? I don't know. Another issue is going to be the fact that we have a lot of depth at the edge rusher position. I don't know if he'll really be able to get in anywhere really, because you look up and down the list of our depth chart. You talking about Odafe Owe, Mike Green, Kyle Van Noy, David Ojabo, Tavius Robinson, Adisa Isaac. I would assume if he does make the roster, they would get rid of David Ojabo or Adisa Isaac. Probably David Ojabo, but then again, now the NFL has this new thing. I think it's called like the international exemption, where if you have a player who was born in another country, he's not gonna count towards your 90-man roster. If they keep David for that reason alone, I think that's silly, just because even though that allows you to stash an extra person, if he's just a non-factor out there, I don't think it's really worth it to look that deep to even bother trying to keep him beyond that point. But that's neither here nor there. As far as Kaimon is concerned, I think those two guys would be the main guys that he would have to try to fight his heart out to try to surpass and leapfrog one of them. But even if he doesn't, I still think there's a reasonable chance he could make the practice squad. I would like to see it. I would be excited to see it. But let me know, what are your thoughts on Kaimon Walker? Do you think he has serious potential? One thing I definitely took away from him was the fact that he was much stronger than he looked, in my opinion. I didn't think he was the biggest person, and once you saw his arm measurements, I'm like, he also doesn't have the length that you would like, but he played with a lot more power than I expected, which I thought was cool. But let me know, do you have any thoughts on Kaimon Rucker, and do you think he could at the least make the practice squad, or do you think he'll go past that and actually be one of the guys who make the roster at the beginning of the season?